VIS P35. We had jam. And now we had a fat, I don't think we cocked. Or something. Weird. Yeah, that last round didn't ignite. I just recocked it and it shot. So it must have been a bad primer. Held open. Well, you see why it's important to have double strike capability with firearms. Sometimes primers do not go off. Hi, Misha here. And recently I put up a video about my top favorite World War II firearms. And more than a few people commented that I did not put this gun in that list. And to be fair, it actually was originally on the table, but I took it out to try to keep the video at least around 30 minutes long. Plus, it's not a major combatant gun, even though I guess in recent years these have become more famous, more popular than they once were. This is the Polish FB-Radom Wz.35 VIS, often just called the P-35, or under German manufacture, which actually most of these are made, the Pistol 35P. And mine here is a Type 2 variation. That means it has no stock slot, but retains the 3 levers, and was made relatively early in production. Well, I'm not going to go too much into this pistol here. You can read online, but yeah, this is one of the first pistols to be designed and manufactured in Poland. Work began in 1930. By 1931 there were some drawings and preliminary prototypes, and by 1935 this was undergoing military trials, and it went up against several other designs and was selected by the Polish military as its next standard issue sidearm. And by 1936, the first of these were coming out of the FB-Radom factory. They were initially slated to go to cavalry and other infantry. And then later in 1938, once they had enough, they started to be delivered to the Armored Corps, the Air Force, artillery, so on and so forth. And this was actually intended to replace all sidearms in Poland by the early 1940s. The initial order was for 90,000. But of course, Germans, 1939, September 1, Germans invaded, at which time FB-Radom had delivered around 49,400 to the Polish military. So these were in service, and a relatively large number for a relatively small military when World War II officially began. Germans would, initially, they would capture the FB-Radom factory, and for a time it would pretty much sit dormant. But then they would start up production again in late 1940 or early 1941. The first pistols produced under German control, German occupation, were assembled from leftover 1939 parts. There were around 3,000 of these. The pre-German invasion guns are known as Polish Eagles because they had the big eagle on the side. The early production are of course called German capture eagle guns. And after that, full actual production under German control would happen. They would introduce the Waffenamt of WAA-77 as a proof stamp. That's when the Type 1 would appear. Then they would delete the stock slot early on. Early production guns would have a high gloss blued finish. Later they would go to a military type blued finish like this one. Then later they would go to the Type 3 where they would delete the takedown catch here. Then they would go to the Type 4. which would start off with blued finish, kind of rough blue. Later would go to phosphating. Earlier Type 4s would have wood grips with the FB logo. Later they would go to slab wood grips that were just, serrated. And then real late production guns would even do away with the decocker lever, essentially being a single control gun, the slide stop. What do we have here? Well, in a way, this is a pretty typical handgun. It fires 9mm 9x19 parabellum from an 8-round magazine with a Browning style mag release. It is single action only. There is no manual safety or magazine disconnect, but we do have a decocking lever here. As I said, there is, at least on earlier guns, a takedown lever to help disassembly. It's basically a hold open for the slide. The gun is about 2.5 pounds loaded. It's about 8 inches long and has a 4.7-inch barrel. All pretty standard. It has typical notch sights. The rear is windage drift adjustable. The front is just basically your regular post. Originally this had the synthetic grips, either black or brown. Like I said, later they would go sometimes to wood. We do have a lanyard loop on the bottom. Originally, magazines would have a machined follower. Later this would be changed to stamped to speed up production and save resources. As you see, it's a pretty typical mag, single stack. This operates using a modified Browning linkless design, much like the contemporary high power. It is quite analogous to a 1911 in a lot of ways, but just a 9mm. It does have the grip safety here. That is your only safety. No, like I said, manual type. That's just a decocker. That was originally done for cavalry use. If I can do it one-handed here, left-handed at that. There we go. You see it springs back up. Kind of a sliding type trigger, 1911 style. So in a lot of ways it's a very conventional gun, even by the standards of the 1930s. No double action here, no double stack magazine, no crazy great sights. It's not especially light, too big, too small. These are known for being durable and reliable. They're also known for being quite accurate. What really I think gets these a lot of attention is the grip is very ergonomic because it flares at the bottom, making your grip naturally kind of gravitate up. The trigger is fine, it's not outstanding. The sights are fine, but not outstanding. Early Polish guns, of course, have a high degree of fit and finish. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that Poland just made a really good domestic gun, even if they more or less copied Browning to do so. And also the World War II reputation. Of course, these are produced using forced labor by FB-Radom. Initially, 41, 42, the German, Jews, Polish workers. In 43, they actually brought in Jewish slave labor. And of course, the conditions were not good. That said, they realized that the chances of betrayal and sabotage were high, so they made the price of sabotage basically death. And also to try to keep these out of the hands of the Polish underground, the Polish resistance, final assembly was done at Steyr, where the barrels were also made. But even that did not keep the Wz.35 out of the hands of the Polish resistance. Originally, they would get barrels, just, older barrels that snuck out of the factory back when they were still being made there. Later, little kind of garage basement workshops would be set up in Warsaw to make barrels. And several hundred, maybe a few thousand pistols crept out in parts kit form. Essentially, they would sneak out frames, slides, little bits, and assemble them in Poland. Also, sometimes invoices and orders would be faked, numbers would be kind of jiggled, and complete guns would be snuck out and smuggled to the resistance, who did use them. In fact, these were quite well known in the Polish uprising. So despite German efforts, even making it harder and harder to get these, the Poles were quite determined and did use the Wz.35 against the Germans. Eventually, in 1944, the Russians were getting close to the city of Radom, Poland. So, in the summer of that year, the factory would be shut down, but then the Russian offensive would stall out, and so the Germans had time to go back and essentially loot the factory, shipping the production, tooling, and equipment to Steyr in Austria. So beginning in late 1944 and running through March or April of 1945, the last Type 4 guns would be made entirely in Austria, although still using Polish machinery, plans, and all that good stuff. The Germans would primarily issue the pistol 35P to paratroopers. The Luftwaffe often kind of got second fiddle guns. They would also issue these to police and other security, and they would even have some Wz.35s they exported during the war for cash, so they obviously thought relatively highly of this pistol. German production is unknown when counting Steyr and everything, but it's estimated between 310 and 380,000 of these were made under the Germans from 1941 through 1945. So a much larger number than the under 50,000 made for the Polish. And after World War II, Poland did not start Wz.35 production up. Some were still used, leftover pistols, but the communists would take over and they would quickly switch to the Tokarev, which is known as the Wz.33 or Wz.48, depending on who you ask in Poland. And that was pretty much the end of this pistol. Of course, the FB-Radom factory would continue on using the Circle 11 designation. And then in 1997, after the end of communism, it would actually make a small run of Wz.35s using original plans and maybe even some leftover original tooling that could be scraped up. And then FB-Radom, restructured around 2000, would make another small run in 2010. So in recent times, a few Wz.35 modern production versions have been made, and allegedly FB-Radom is going to have these in limited but consistent production starting this year, 2019. None have been imported into the U.S., but maybe eventually we'll see them. But of course, they won't have the same World War II history. So, keep that in mind. But it's an interesting gun, and like I said, people seemed interested in it, so we had a little bit of shooting footage from a while back. This is really a fascinating gun, especially when you factor in the whole Polish development. Even if they used Browning's designs, they still made a gun very much their own. And then, of course, the Polish resistance in World War II. And there's a lot of neat variations of this pistol. Anyway, if you have a Wz.35, we'd love to hear about yours in the comments. Or if you have any questions or just general comments, feel free to post them below. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha. I'll catch you very soon next time.